As you see here, my first name is pronounced Gerlinde, Gerlinde Jones. Yeah. Then my maiden name Gerlinde Albert. It was a French name and had an accent, but that was taken off after 1933. Okay, that didn't look German, so it had to go. The name was Germanized. Okay. I grew up during the height of when Hitler was rising and got into power. So for me, that was life. I knew nothing else. And no one could talk to me or tell me anything else. Because if they would, I would turn them in. Because my loyalty was, one loyalty was to the state. It was my mother and my father. And my mother and father came second. That's simply how it was. I know it's unbelievable, but that's how it was. Okay, so that was sort of summing up my early life. I mean, there wasn't that much to it. It was totally dedicated to achievement, work hard, academic achievement, physical achievement, and everything that was done was for what we call to preserve the Reich, to keep it 1,000 years. You know, this was the philosophy behind the Nazis, you know, 1,000 years and longer if possible. So your entire life was dedicated to that. No, it was not, but looking back in retrospect now, it was not a very easy life. I never learned how to play. Everything, my play was going on the hikes, singing, you know, marching songs and talking about politics. Even as a young child, in the most simplistic way, we were introduced to that in indoctrinated. And what I began to hate, and still do hate now, was loudspeakers. Loudspeakers were part of my life. From the minute I woke up to the minute I went to bed. Part of the indoctrination process. Okay. Couldn't get away from it. You just couldn't. So that is about the introduction of the early life.
Your parents motivated your background?
Yeah. It was kind of a sort of an interesting background. My mother's father came from Italy and was Italian. He was had come several times. He was a student in Italy, in university in Rome. He studied engineering, and he came to Germany to study some of the cotton mills, the machinery, and it was there he went to a dance in Germany where he met my grandmother. And they fell in love when he married, and he stayed in Germany. So the children were born. I think they tried once to go back, but my grandmother was very homesick, and they returned to Germany. So my father his family came from Alsace-Lorraine, the French part of Alsace-Lorraine. And the grandmother there also was German. So the males were all from different countries, and the females were German. That was not very good for my family. I think it was, I was reminded in school every day that I wasn't an Aryan. I was only part of them. You know, my grandfathers were foreign. And believing that today, I look back there in retrospect, the reason they were not, for instance, my grandmother, my grandfather from the Italian side, was because they were allies, and I think that saved my mother's neck. Germany and Italy were allies, so they didn't touch her, okay, and the family. So that was safe. That I believe that. You know, France, Alsace-Lorraine, they were not quite as picky. They allowed a little bit more leniency there. But it was generally, let me say it, I was constantly reminded that I was only part German. No matter if I was born there or this, it didn't matter. And I had to work harder than anyone else to achieve the goal they set out for the young people. And I did, believe me, all the way up to scholarships and participation in regional gymnastic programs. I worked so hard because I wanted to overcome this, what you call discrimination, and be just a little better than everyone else, hoping to be really recognized. And I was, I was recognized with grades, and the biggest recognition was I was selected to attend a regional festival that was visited by Hitler to hand out awards to the highly academically and physically trained kids in that region. So from our city, from our town, I was selected to attend. And it was quite something to meet Hitler in person and being spoken to me by him and telling me, I'm very proud of you, this is what we want in our young generation, the German generation, and a German woman, perfect, the perfection was the whole idea. So, well, in that process, since we're talking about my parents had to be very, very quiet and not talk. They didn't like what was going on, the way I was taught, the way I was indoctrinated, but they could not talk. It was much too dangerous for them. If they would talk, I might turn them in. And I would have. At that time, I would have. So they were very careful what they were saying. I never heard anything about politics. They were extremely careful what subject they touched on. So they stayed just with family issues, And I asked my mother once, and she said it was relatively easy because we loved you a lot, and we did not want you to be in a position where someday you would feel responsible that you had turned us in and we were killed. That is also, by thinking like that, it made it easy for us just to, we had to go along with these things, but you were more important. You were simply more important than Hitler and his fool. No, this is the 1,000-year right, that was the message coming from my parents. So it shakes me up still when I think that at the age of 8 or 9, I would have turned my own parents in, my grandparents, and everyone who said anything against the life as we lived it in Germany at that time. But I would have. So, well, that's sort of a little bit touching on the relationship with my parents. My father, that was a very interesting situation too. He was, I was young. This is more what my father told me afterwards. He was confronted and was asked, he was an accountant in the municipality, so municipal government, he had a job, and he was confronted and was asked to explain his political persuasion. Okay, well, he said, I'm a socialist. My father was a socialist. His father was a socialist. I'm a socialist. I will always be a socialist. Well, thank you. He was politely fired of the job. Okay, he was let go. Unfortunately, he had a cousin with a very large construction business who took him in. Wasn't for very long because he was one of the first ones drafted and thrown to the Russian front when the invasion of Poland began. He was there, Yeah, I think that was part of the whole deal behind it. But again, he was lucky. We were lucky he wasn't killed or thrown into a concentration camp. It could have gone that way too. Well, that's pretty much sort of where the parents were in my life. Yeah.
Why don't we take some questions sort of pre-war, talking about, your impressions as a child, and we'll talk about the war in a little bit, but maybe if students have any questions about her experience in relation to school and anything for that matter, whatever. Anybody have any questions?
Did you have Jewish kids in your school?
And what?
Did you have Jewish kids in your school?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very, when you're about 7 or 8, you're quite young, and explanations have to be simple, not complicated, you don't understand, but it was uncomplicated for me to see the kids in school I grew up with. I've known them since I was born. We were the same age. We went swimming together. We learned to play. We played ping pong together. I mean, we went hiking together, and we did all the things together. They were my friends, And I would come to school one morning and bit by bit they were gone. Okay? And I had always got one explanation. That was obviously given to me. My explanation said, oh, they probably were very unhappy because they were I knew much about discrimination. I had felt it myself. They were discriminated against, and they went to Switzerland. That was Switzerland or England. They didn't want to live in Germany anymore. That was it for me. And they disappeared from them. Now, the interesting part was that didn't necessarily mean that they disappeared into a concentration camp. We had apparently a very active underground. People, no one knew who was involved. It was so dangerous. But some of them later, after the war, they came back. Okay? So they were slipping out of the country. People like our doctor, the family doctor, he came back with the family and the cotton mill owner. Yeah. Because, and they were saying, but then they could reveal who the people were. But not then. There was no one knew what was going on. It just, no one knew who the other person, when they delivered the person to escape, they didn't know who the person was. They were contacted. They all went by numbers. But that is, but for me again, I was told, they are dissatisfied with our new Germany, and it's best for them that they leave if they're dissatisfied. That's what I believe. Switzerland was the very famous one. Switzerland or Sweden. In school, a heavy emphasis. Everything that was, like I said, mentioned before, no play, all academics. Academics, sports, sports, and academics. That was highly profiled. That was what he wanted to train. His idea was to train a total, dedicated workforce and military force. And people had to be the best minds, the best mind and body, perfection. Oh God, I hated it when I think back now. Everything had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes. You were punished severely. Any mistakes. Only perfection. There were only A's. There were no B's. I mean, they were, then we were shoved aside. This kind of philosophy. So I went, again, I had no choice, I didn't know anything. And I thought the whole world lived like that. Since I had no access to books or anything from the outside world, that's how it was. I said, obviously the whole world lives like that. That's how it was. School was, fun and not, but I mean, after a while it got a little boring, and then they sort of interrupted sometimes. The activities we had to do in school were going hiking. Everything was oriented in helping. When we went hiking, we collected things. We collected things like to make maple syrup from the trees for the ride. Everything was concentrated. Every move we did, every activity we did was for the ride. Okay, so that's how they had it going. There was no alternative, no middle ground. This is how it was. It's very hard to explain when you live in a democracy, hard to explain. But that's simply how it is. And the thing was that the younger generation like yourself, they grew up with. Just imagine yourself, for the past 17 years, that's all you had lived in. You had never seen anything, you hadn't been out of the country, that is it. Okay? You would probably think maybe everyone that lives like that.
You want to tell them about Kristallnacht?
Yeah.
Maybe what it was first and then how it impacted your community?
That is where my first sort of doubts came when I saw that. Because I had this beautiful picture, all the kids, the friends who disappeared, they were living somewhere in England or Switzerland. Okay. Then came Kristallnacht. It was a scary night. It was, what I vaguely remember. By the way, when 9/11 happened, and I saw the fire, the flame going up in the towers. I was just frozen for a few seconds because it reminded me of what I had seen when I was younger. And that's how it looked like. The whole, this was a small town I lived in, was on fire. So it was actually the main street with all the businesses that were Jewish businesses that were all firebombing the whole building, everything on fire, and people screaming, yelling, and and I was there with my mother. My father by then was gone, and the Russians gone. It was a very scary moment, and I was explained that these were Jews who were betraying us and murdering us and ripping us off. And there came the confusion again, where I said, but I don't understand. I met the parents of Ingrid, my friend. They were nice, they don't do things like that. My mind got a little unfocused there. This is where some of the doubts came. The next day, people all came, had yellow stars on their coats and jackets, to identify them as Jews. Was slowly, it was very difficult because I couldn't discuss it with my parents, my little doubts, and I could not, developmentally, I just wasn't at that age to rationalize like a young adult or anything. So there was a sense of confusion. What is right here? Who's right? Are they in England or are they not? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What is this? Confusion was one of the things. But it was usually when you had one bit of confusion, the indoctrination process was just a little bit more to kill that confusion. Okay. The Kristallnacht was very scary. It was in the middle of the night, quiet, and all this. Suddenly, all these fires, all this massive. The whole main street was burning on fire, and people just so confused and screaming and yelling. They didn't know what's going on. And the SS, the came, kicked the doors in, and dragged the people out. For an 8-year-old, that was pretty scary to see. I had never actually seen it like that, nothing like that. That was the beginning of, for me, I kept it inside. There's something not quite right here. People shouldn't do that. But I couldn't talk about it.
Any other questions about the pre-war period? Yeah, Angus. Mr. O'Callaghan.
Kristallnacht, how was that portrayed in the media in Germany? How did they explain what they did?
Okay, Kristallnacht, remember the media we had was all state-oriented. Okay, they could not, there was no freedom of the press as you have it. They had to present it as Hitler had ordered. That's how it will be presented. Kristallnacht, from our town, I've heard that some of the Jews had reneged on some loans of the people and they were bankrupt. That was in our town. There were several versions. And the people lost their home and everything else. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. It was just later you find this out. But that the military had to intervene. The police couldn't handle that. The military had to teach them a lesson. And that was the lesson. From then on, they had to be identified. The yellow star, so we all would know what we are dealing with, and to be extremely careful when you deal with it. Yeah. Oh, sometimes today I sometimes hear voices, through the news, saying against the Jews, and I said, hey, if I were to translate that, what I'm hearing here, it would be exactly what I heard in the Third Reich. The same message, kill them all, exterminate them. It's amazing. How could that be? That was then. This is now. This was then. It should have ended then. Yeah.
Yeah, Melanie.
What was Hitler like?
Okay. The personal contact when I got my award. He was nice. Very proud man. Very, very approachable. for some of the younger children, they brought him flowers, the typical, you know, the dictator, and children with flowers. He was okay. He was in control. When he was in a situation like that with children, his insanity didn't show up. I don't know if he was stoked up or whatever it was. The man was very sick. But he was okay with the children. And very proud. He took that all very personal of the awards he handed out. He believed, I have done that. If it weren't for me, his children wouldn't be trained like that. He took that as a personal success, which made him happy, and then he smiled. You were safe when he smiled. You weren't when he didn't. So, no, I couldn't, you know, I saw him, we all admired him. He was, you know, Eric captured some pictures of some of the rallies, and he captured some of the pictures with the children. And he looked, it reminded me like of the rock stars, when everyone storming that, you know, that rock star. That's how it was with Hitler. He was like a god. Very charismatic. You know, he knew how to do it. He was a good speaker, and he promised heaven and earth. He came at a time a bit similar that now with the depression, you know, the big depression, we all studied that. Here's this guy who promises jobs for everyone. Jobs, you know, and food. And he said, when you vote me in, every one of you will be able to build a house, get a car, the Volkswagen, and have a chicken in the pot. That was the big message. I will make sure that everyone gets a job. He got in, but what he forgot to tell us, the price we would have to pay. Because he wanted in by himself, no opposition. The opposition had to be wiped out. They were always blamed for everything. They set fires at the Reichstag, or they did that, until he wiped them all out. And he had control, total control. Then we had to pay the bill. Because then we had to pay the price.
What were you told about the British and the French, like what kind of propaganda regarding, in preparation for the war, because this was obviously coming, what kind of stuff were you taught about your potential enemies?
They were murderers and killers, you know. They had no, it was particularly, actually the Americans, a state of mafia killers, we call it, the mafia killers. You know. All the ones we didn't want here and in Europe, the criminals, the insane, they all ran and settled in US, Canada, or England. That's what they have there. That's what you have to deal with if they ever, he scared the hell out of us. He really scared them. And we were, I remember we were taught, if the, I think it was the Americans who used to, during, sometimes at air raids, they dropped more than just bombs, they dropped some food and candies. Okay? That was nice. But we were told it's poison, don't touch it. They poisoned everything. So when you see some candy on the floor or gum on the floor, it's poisoned. This is what they do. So as a result of that, I was scared of the Allies. Really scared. You know? I said, if they ever see me, they kill me and my mother. That was a belief. I really did believe that. So, yeah, oh, very thorough. Everything was well. And remember, there were no. I could not go to the library and get a book and read about England or the state. It was not available. They were all burnt. Everything was gone. There were only German books. What he wanted us to read. What he wanted us to study. So, and he made a decision. You studied, you had a certain grade point. Is the education ministry would go to the school and say, this person is talented in that, and this person is talented. And then you didn't have much of a choice of what you wanted to study. You were told what to study.
Okay. Any other questions about pre-war? You want to tell us just briefly how life changed when the war broke out?
Yeah, life changed quite dramatically because of course, air raids. We had everyone knew there was a war. And then someone asked me once, when did you know there was a war? Oh, morning. I said, I knew pretty quick and pretty fast. We were on a constant alert, 24 hours. You know, the day bombing was usually England. The nights the Americans came in. Okay, so we were fairly 24 hours. It was horrific. You know, we lived a little bit outside of the Kaiserslautern area there was heavily bombed, but being so close, 6 miles from the area, and a lot of industry, war industry, we got it too. Okay, and we lived more in bunkers than at home. You know, it was a really scary thing. And that was something. Here, there was a moment with me of when little doubts came in my mind, I was ready to look at something, and when that happened, I said, well, there we go. Our teachers must be right when they told us the Allies are evil. Look what they're doing. Okay? The bombing then. Oh, I saw, I often think, when I think back, and I say, I saw more dead bodies than live bodies. I seem to spend a lot of time at the cemetery, burying, civilians who were killed. And even there we weren't safe. We were attacked at the cemetery. It was really, really bad. And many, I had a particular incident that I think that did a lot of damage, I don't know, did a lot of hurt to my whole system. Was a close school friend. We walked to school in the morning, and just one airplane was not an attack. I never know what it was. One airplane came down, starting to shoot. I jumped in the ditch. She was a little slower, and she was shot. She fell right over my body, over me. We're lying there, and we were lying there for a few hours. I couldn't move. I knew she was dead. I was so traumatized. I couldn't move. I just had on top of me. Under a few hours later, the air raid was found. And these are the sort of things that left a lot of hurt, a lot of, Eric knows best, a lot of ideas that, well, if I can do something to avoid, if I ever grow up and have children or sons or to go in the military, I will do everything to tell them not to go. I very anti-war. I became, when it was over, very anti-war and anti-military because of my own personal experience. I see nothing but dead bodies. And there were too many. Okay? So I know I had many conversations with Eric's grandparents, to try to justify it. I said, but you can't do that. I said, I'm sorry, I feel like that. I just feel like that. I've got nothing against, as a matter of fact, the Americans and Canadians, we had a Canadian air base where again, treated us very nicely after the war. Thanks God what happened. We survived as a result of that. But I cannot wipe this what happened, what I've seen out, what made me feel and shape me the way I am now. Yeah, these were the things. Yeah. This was war, and this went on for years. School eventually was out. We could not go to school anymore. We just had some my parents had books. And we sat in that. It was like a mine shaft. I have memories of that mine shaft, dripping water coming from the ceiling, Coleman stove, something like that. We cooked our food. We just never left much in that thing. And the parents instructed the children. They got the books from the school board. And we had our school there. But yes, I knew. And then I think, of course, personal family deaths of cousins. My oldest cousin, who was a very exceptionally gifted physics major in university and graduate, disappeared in Russia. Never found a trace of him. And many, and another cousin who had 3 sons, all wiped out, all three of them, no one left anymore. And there were many like that, so yeah, I saw that it's the whole war. Eric's generation in our family is the first one that survived after 20, since World War I. They all died in World War I and World War II. So he is the first male that survived. I made sure of that. I said, I'm going someplace what's safe.
Any questions about the war period? Somebody's got to have a burning question. Come on. Okay. You want to tell them about first contact with the Allies when they occupied when they came into your town?
Yeah.
At the end of the war?
Yeah. And towards the end, the air raids and bombing, then shelling began to, and we knew the Allies were coming. But I knew when it stopped, it was sort of an eerie silence, it was quiet. It was almost scary, it was so quiet, And then we heard some rumbling in the background, we all came out, and these were tanks, and these were the Allies coming in. The French came first, they occupied us first. And then later after the French, the Americans. Okay. But the picture was very traumatic too. They had no time, there were a lot of bodies on the streets through air raids. They had no time to pick the civilians up because the Allies were moving. And they later picked them up and they were mass burying. There were about 100 women, children, who were buried then in a mass grave. And the Allies helped to bury them. But I remember the soldiers coming torn clothes, really looking defeated, which they were, walking back, all prisoners. And it was a very sad and very, I don't know, it's very hard to tell. It was more than sad. It was defeat, it was disillusionment, it was for many people, whatever happened to us that led us here. For my own parents, they would talk about that in other places. But it was a very eerie and difficult picture.
And that's the German troops coming back.
Yeah, the German.
What about your first contact with the Americans?
When the Americans came in, they had part of the headquarters, the 7th Army in our town there. And the first thing that was done, any of the civilians, or any guns you have, they have to be handed in, even BB guns. Well, we had a BB gun. Yeah, we had a BB gun. So my father was still somewhere. We were occupied at so much earlier. So we went and we took BB gun. And here I saw my first American soldier, ally. He looked at me, I looked at him, and I screamed. I screamed in terror, absolute terror. The poor guy, I didn't know what to say, what to do. My mother handed the gun over, and I felt sorry for him looking back in time now. God, But that was my first contact. He touched me on the hand. He said something that was English. At that time I didn't understand because I had French, so I was English. That was my first contact. We had some positive and some negative contact. On the whole, the Allies, the Americans were good. The original occupation, France sent Moroccan troops in. They were the first occupier. And it was a different sort of, everything was allowed. The same thing happened in Eastern Europe when the Russians moved in. Everything, women, children, no one was too young, no one was too old to be raped and beaten up. I mean, it was what happened I think it happened in war, and when a country is defeated and troops move in, it just happens. So the French commanding officer said, we fixed that, these are soldiers, they have been without women for a long time, They opened 2 houses and put prostitutes in. And it stopped. Okay? Then we got into a more normal routine. But after that, the Americans came in, and I have to be very honest, nothing like that happened. No, nothing ever like that happened. There were incidents we had where you could see some of them were very angry with the Germans, you know, and one of the incidents was at the time when the occupation came, Hitler had destroyed all warehouses, that included all food. We had nothing. By the time the occupation came in, we were starving. You know. I mean, when I hear sometimes hungry, I think back starving. I mean, really hungry. I chewed dandelion, I chewed grass until we had a garden and until the fruit started to grow. You know, we had cherry trees and so. Then, God, I had some food to eat. You know. But at the time, absolutely nothing. So, two American soldiers brought out a big tub, like a wash tub, filled it with food. Okay? We looked at this food, the kids around each other, our eyes were just glowing. Then poured gasoline over it and set it on fire. Now, that was one of the negative things. But that was the only incident I've ever seen. And looking back again, I said, who knows what happened to them? Who knows? Since revenge, whatever it was, they may have been very hurt. Maybe they were Jewish American who lost family members. I don't know. Okay. But I needed to get older to get a perspective looking back in time. When you're only about 9 or 10, you cannot rationalize these things. You know. But I could when I was 20 and decided to go to university. You know. Then you can rationalize this more. It's in a context of a discussion, you know, university. But yeah, but I have to say, for all in all, same as Canadians, we have nothing like that. Canadians were born, I think, complete.
Any other questions about sort of wartime? Yeah.
Towards the end of the war, when Hitler died, how did you guys find out? What did they tell you? Did they tell you that he killed himself?
Okay, yeah, that was, you know, my father returned, and he said, you are now old enough to be told the truth. You're going to hear it from me first, and he brought all my uncles who also were in the war to talk to us. And he informed us what had gone on. I didn't want to believe him, you know. He said, you need something more than I can give you. And he picked out, it was a rather expensive private school, picked that out for me. At school, were all teachers were international, from Belgium, from France, from England, from Sweden, and most of the countries that were at war were involved. It was a Catholic school, there were nuns, but they were all from these countries that were fighting and fought Germany, which was very, very good. And strictly, I would say, by example, how they never hated. They always talked of vision, of hope, of looking forward instead of backwards, going on, you know, and unconditional acceptance. I think that worked.
The question was about Hitler. When you heard about the death of Hitler, what did you think? Had you already been told about the horrors of the war?
Yeah.
And how did you feel when Hitler was that a big deal?
Very ambivalent. You know, I felt with the whole thing, with Hitler's death, and then after him came that Nuremberg trial, I felt very, very ambivalent. I felt, yes, he deserves it, but I saw also some good parts he gave us, okay? And it was an ambivalent thing, you know. I had to be older, Eric, you know. I was to internalize really what has happened. I was about 19, and for university started right away. His historical documents were collected and the students were introduced. It didn't take long.
You want to tell them about denazification? That process of being denazified. And also when you learned about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Tell us about
that was, I wouldn't believe it. I would not believe, I said, no, there must be lies. There must be lies, they're all in Switzerland. or England. I believed they were all alive. And I couldn't believe it. I said, no, it's impossible. How could he get away with that? How could 45 million people allow him to get away with that? Well, he did. Okay. And I think what I found and what I learned there is this blind obedience. We had to believe everything. At that moment where I found that out, I said, no matter what I will grow up, what I will be, I'll never believe in this blind political propaganda roughed down my throat. Ever again, no matter who they are. That was my vision for my life, that I will not be taken in again, no matter what the promise is. Heaven on earth, no. Boy, I want to know the price. What do you promise me that, what do I have to do to get it? Okay. So that was sort of a realization, really was
How were you unbrainwashed? 'Cause that
in
was
the
a
school.
process, yeah.
It was a religious school, was run by the Catholic Church. And with these different sisters who were French and English, some of American we had, and all Europeans, you know, all from the countries. Germany was more or less involved, Russian too. And by example, you know, some of these sisters had lost brothers in the war, and how, one clear example was, it was a period of, like I mentioned to you before, all the food was destroyed, and we were rationed, and a lot, the Red Cross brought a lot of food in. Milk and buns was part of the Red Cross, helped school children. So there was one child in my class, she was almost fainting, she was so hungry, and one of the sisters gave her bun to that child. She ate that, and within 10 minutes that sister passed out. She was flat on the floor, hungry, and giving her bun away. These sort of things impacted on me. They impact on a young mind. And when someone said, I accept you and I love you, you believe it. You know, to fall on the floor, after you sung that, and you give a last piece of bread to someone else. These were some of the incidents that shaped my life. I'll never forget that. Yeah. Incidents my father had, I told you, I think he told you himself, also affected me a great deal. His commanding officer was from the same hometown as he was. He was a theologian. He taught theology in Freiburg, University of Freiburg. So very spiritual man. My father was in the army, he was army, but they were in Russia and the Ukraine. And one soldier obviously was killed by the underground. The order came to wipe that whole village out. The dogs too, everything. Let no one out. And here was this man of God. I can't do that. He called my father in the night before, and he said, I can't do that. If I do it, I cannot. How can I go back to the University in Freiburg and teach the love of God? You know, I can't do that. But I want you to know, so you can go and tell my family what I'm doing. And be very careful. Don't utter the sound until the war is over. Okay? So he dressed up in full battle uniform, like so he was scouting the front line to see where the enemy is, as the enemy moved in a little closer. His gun, everything, full battle. And he knew he would die. And he did. That was the only way. That's what he wanted my father to tell his family after the war. This sort of thing, I think, men like that shaped my life. And led me towards the helping profession, I think. A lot of things in my life shaped me to go into the direction of the helping profession. That was one thing.
Any general questions? Anybody have, Ray?
Um,
Over here, Mother.
Yeah.
When did you move to Canada?
When I first came, I met Eric's father. I, like some of you, probably going through the same thing. I knew I would want to go to university, but I wanted some time, maybe travel a little bit, work a little bit, do that. But I would eventually go. I would say to my husband, I'll go, but right now I'm going to work. So someone told me about the Americans, that they hired people and they paid good salary. And since I knew some English by that time, I applied there and got in the Ministry of Finance. Well, all my plans sort of got shut down with my education because I met Eric's father. We fell in love, we married. He was still a student, so we came back to Seattle. He went back to University of Washington. I worked and he worked part-time. After he had his PhD, he worked in South Dakota for a year, and I always sat on him, let's go to Canada. Let's go to Canada. Canada was safe. By that time, I had Richard, your oldest brother, I wanted him safe. And luckily, Eric's father was of this sort of similar mind. So he applied. There was a position advertised at youve. He applied for that position, and he was accepted. And we came to Canada. And it was wonderful. I never looked back. That's where I wanted to be. That's where I stayed. That was home.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Raquel.
I was wondering, during the war, obviously you were a young girl, and there was a lot of, terrible things you saw, and you told us some of these stories. Can you remember during the war where you were just, moments where you were just a little girl, and you were playing and having fun with other kids, or were there moments like that? Or?
The one thing I remember, once in a while, it was, I forgot, I've seen it here, kids doing it. We put these crayons, they look like steps, which you jumped around from one step to the other. And that we did in between indoctrination sessions when we went on hikes. Those were the moments, that's all. Playing with dolls or anything like that, I don't remember. Because everything was tailored for us to politically involved. Even the games. I missed a lot out on playing as a child.
Yeah, we have another question from Ray.
Have you been back to Germany ever?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I've been back. And of course there have been some great changes. I think I was particularly impressed with, that was my generation. University of Heidelberg was the university here where I would have gone had I still come in. And the students, boy oh boy, when they went into action, when they had any complaints, they had strikes, they complained, they walked out of university, they laid the whole university flat. And I said, wow, I was impressed seeing that. I said, hopefully when I continue seeing things like that, it will never happen again. Because they're now speaking up, and it did, it got better and better now. Such a thing. I stay in touch with some family members. When something happens, it's shut down immediately.
What impact did the Vietnam War, while you were in the States, it was just gearing up before you moved, but did the Vietnam War, the emerging war, have an impact on your decision to move to Canada?
You better believe it. Yeah. You better believe it. Yeah. I just didn't want to have anything to do with kind of such, I know, you see sometimes movies, and I've seen all kinds of movies when I was young, as part of the indoctrination, how grand it looks, the conquering hero. My God, they don't show you the dead bodies. You captured some of them. I don't know where you got the picture.
Oh, they're documentaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did a lot of work with people escaping from war-torn country as a counselor, and I hear similar stories. what they gone through, just dead bodies and just getting out of there and coming to Canada or the States and feeling safe. It makes me sad when I hear that, because I'm very positive. I always want to hope things have totally changed. We still have a lot of work to do. It's not 100%. I still see a lot of repetition things here. I don't like it. We're human.
Anybody else? Yeah, sure.
What kind of history did they teach you during, like, the post-war period about Germany and stuff in school?
What was it?
How were you taught about the Nazi period just after the end, like in school, when you
Oh,
were
yeah.
a teenager? How you unprogram all that?
Yeah.
What were you taught about Nazi Germany in sort of the late 40s, so to speak,
Oh, the late 40s.
roughly?
Well, it was always the same message, okay? Oh, you mean after the war?
After the war.
Oh, after the war.
How were you
Oh, yeah, the truth came out, all the document. Well, after the war, I was really taught, all the books we had in school were designed by the Allies. We had no German books for about 4 or 5 years before the Ministry of Education was back in place again, and teachers came out of the system. We had books, but so of course we got the full shebang. The Allies wrote books. We got the messages, and that was again every day I went to school, I got the message. Okay? For 3-4 years, and when the Ministry of Education was fully in place again with teachers, the message was similar. There were no more lies. There were no more lies. We had enough lies. The truth was coming out from the Ministry of Education in Germany. It was very hard to accept. And a lot of people, even up to this day, feel guilty of what had happened. Collective guilt. How could that happen? Could I have done something? Could such and such have done something?
Was there any works of literature that you read that you were denied during your teenage years? What struck you the most in terms of?
With my family, I could get Shakespeare, I could read. I could get books from all over the world, and music. Hollywood came into being. Wow, that was great, I had never seen anything. There were actually movies where people fell in love, It was wonderful, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was, I spent a lot of time in the library because it was fascinating. I would read all the books, so, yeah.
Any other questions?
When you were a child, was there like Nazi parades in your town?
All the time. We marched all the time. Practically every Sunday. They invented things to celebrate. We had so many festivals and days that they invented. Oh yeah. And particularly the young group, they had youth groups. And the girls were called, you may have had that, Betty M. And the boys were in the Hitler Youth, okay? And they marched. He was very anti-church, of course. So he scheduled all those marches and all those Sunday morning during church time, when we met. And no one could do anything about it, Sunday school was gone, forget it. You come here, that's your Sunday school. Yeah.
Or I was just going to say, were there parades, like soldier parades, not just Hitler Youth, but
Yeah, we saw
ESA
that.
yeah.
Yeah, quite a few, a lot. The whole regime was very, very much march music, and we march and singing. And at night, what is the fackel in English again? What do you call it? You light it, okay, and it burns.
Oh, sparklers?
Something like that, which you carried, and that was quite a sight at night, the music and the lights and everything, yeah.
Right.
Did you ever see one of Hitler's like
Well, the only time where I personally have met him was during that, where he handed out the awards. But yeah, well, of course on the radio, and he said, he sounded, he was very charismatic. When he was focused, he was all over the place. Later we found that out, what the documents he was treated, was schizophrenic, and put on medication. Then he was very focused. He was a very good speaker. That's he brought the people. He promised. Even, as I said, he promised it. And for the people, who was out of work, like over here too, the repression, that was paradise. Suddenly they had jobs again. Job, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah, okay.
I would like to know the impacts that everything made today for you, all, okay.
How has that period in history shaped
Yes,
who
and
you
how,
are
Oh,
today?
yeah.
all your parents, impact today
Yeah,
for you.
okay. I became very early, involved. It actually became involved in helping out. So I did it mostly through our church bodies there. When there was an air raid and people were bombed out, I collected blankets and clothing and, help people with other, but I was involved in that very early. After the war, right after, there were a lot of refugees. People from East Germany fled the Russians, And I, again, was very much involved with these people, sitting down with them. And I just talked with them, They're coming into West Germany. The whole experience, I think what came out, that it shaped me, I said, I do not want to destroy or be involved in anything that would hurt individuals or destroy individuals. I want to be a helper instead, helping them. And it was between being a medical doctor, there had several in my family I was familiar with, or family counselor. I was more interested in family dynamics, family working with families. And I chose the latter. Oh yeah, totally, instead of destroying, I hoped I could do something to help. It shaped my life. It pointed me definitely into the direction of helping instead of destroying.
Anybody else? Last chance questions? Yeah, Mr. McCallum?
What sort of advice would you give, say, the students here today or other young people anywhere in the world? Sort of advice, wisdom, or whatever.
Yeah.
What would you say to young people today to avoid what happened so long ago?
We often talk about that. My advice is always watch out for promises, heaven on earth. Ask questions. Make it be very clear with you. Ask penetrating questions, because very often you pay a price. All those promises, and I think in politically you can be very active. If you see something, say, I don't like that. Speak up. Don't be silent. That is the one thing until it's too late. I think, I look back, we did not speak up enough. When we tried to, we couldn't anymore. We got killed. Okay. We had no more choice. And very often when you think about it, it cannot happen. Here, having been still being in a helping profession, having studied human nature, it can. It can, because we are human. It can. But you have one advantage. You have a democracy. Use it. Use it. Don't accept it. Every promise. Question it. That's one of the things. And speak up while you still can. Don't wait too long. I mean, you see it now, you see it now, the Arab Spring, how long these people had to wait. Earlier, I don't know, hopefully maybe it would have been different. But they had to wait a long time. And then it's difficult. A lot of people died, and there was anyone who had any objections in Germany disappeared or put in the market square and shot. So you don't want to wait, that's what I said. Always question, ask questions. Yeah. I don't buy things anymore now. I said, yeah, I've learned it the hard way. And frankly, I don't want you to learn it this way.
Anybody else? Well, thank you. Oh, one more, yeah, go ahead. Anybody have a question? Anyone?
Do you think you've gained anything positive from like living in a private?
Oh yeah, I learned a lot about how to live my life more fuller, much more fuller and more interested. I'm more interested in world affairs, like maybe the average person is, I'm always, watch every political debate, even during the week. I'm more interested, and I participate as much as I can. And my whole life, changed for the better because of the experience I had. I was determined, not to listen to promises anymore. I had to shape my life. I had to make it better. If I would have sat and hoped and waited for promises again, who knows? I'd still be sitting hoping. No, I had to work myself. That's what I gained.
Okay, so I think that's kind of a nice wrap. So thank you very much for
You're
coming as always.
welcome.